Now a NewsNation exclusive. Schools and parents looking for ways to keep children safe in the wake of the deadly Uvalde school shooting. A district in Florida has been taking that goal seriously for years, spending approximately $65 million this year to make it happen. Efforts ramping up after 17 people died in a school shooting in Parkland, Florida. The Miami-Dade district has 18,000 live cameras feeding into their police command center. NewsNation's Brooke Schaefer has a look at other checkpoints that are in place.
Inside this command center, NewsNation getting close-up access to public schools in Miami-Dade County. 18,000 live cameras keeping an eye on every school in the county and any potential threats.
We're very fortunate here in Miami-Dade County to have so many resources.
Edwin Lopez is the police chief for Miami-Dade Public Schools, the fourth largest school district in the country with the largest police force.
We deal with a large amount of threats due to the volume of our school district. We have hundreds of thousands of students.
They often partner with Secret Service or the FBI to investigate what can be an onslaught of threats coming in at all hours.
These threats have no specific time. They come in at 10 at night, at 2 in the morning, so they often have to wake up and start working these cases in order to ensure that school the next day starts in a safe manner.
Safety at schools is top of mind following last week's deadly mass shooting at an elementary school in Uvalde, Texas. Miami-Dade Schools Police Headquarters about an hour from Parkland, the scene of yet another mass shooting at a school in 2018.
We know that during these critical incidents, time is of the essence, and within the first few seconds or minutes are when the casualties occur. So our officers train on a single-person response during active shooter incidents, and that's critical. There is no delay in our response.
Police in Miami-Dade even use a special technology to quickly alert them to the sound of gunshots in the area. Across the country, there are recommendations, but no requirements or federal standards for school safety. But Chief Lopez says there is one requirement for him and his team should there be an active shooter at one of their schools.
If there's an individual that's coming to our schools to hurt innocent kids, our officers are specifically trained to neutralize the threat. And in other words, to kill the person that's trying to kill our children.
And that chief says they can't guarantee anything, but they are adding layers of safety there. So it is Friday, which means we have our Rush Hour Roundtable. And this week, we are bringing in our panel a bit earlier to discuss news all throughout the hour. So first, let's introduce you to our panel today. We do have Ashley Banfield, host of Banfield on NewsNation. Next, Megan Basham, reporter for the Daily Wire. Mark Lamont Hill, professor of media studies and author of the new book, Seen and Unseen Technology, Social Media, and the Fight for Racial Justice. And last but not least, Capri Cafaro, cookbook author and host of Eat Your Heartland podcast and radio show. So we just heard Brooke's piece there. Our big question, is this the best way to protect schools? Ashley, let's start with you.
I kept thinking about all those video monitors, and wow, that's amazing. So are you then able to watch as a school shooter takes out about 15 or 20 children within a couple of minutes? Because seeing it can only stop it after a while. And these guns that are being used in these school shootings, the AR-15 in particular, they kill people very quickly. So I think it's kind of novel and great that you can maybe see somebody, but the damage gets done awful darn quick.
Can I jump in here, if I may? I'm sorry, because I actually, what you didn't mention in the intro is that I was a state senator and elected official for a decade. And during that time, I actually represented a community that had a school shooting. For high school students in the Chardon City schools died at the hands of an active shooter in that community. It's a wonderful community, a small community, and not a community that would have been able to afford what Miami-Dade is doing. So while it is innovative, I think we have to recognize that, school districts and, local law enforcement and local governments are incredibly stretched. And so we have to think about this in a multidimensional approach. It's incredibly sad, in my opinion, that as we sit here and children are being buried in Texas, and we've seen this time and time again, that we have to have these conversations about how we best protect children and students in classrooms and have to do it with, this like state-of-the-art technology. That's not going to be possible in all circumstances. But we have to ask ourselves why. Why are we in this position as a society right now dealing with this in the way that we are in such frequency?
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting. I mean, this is actually one of the more reasonable proposals that I still very much disagree with. I've heard the, good guy with a gun beats bad guy with a gun theories. I've heard armed teachers. I've heard, in this case, surveil the entire district, and so everyone feels like they're being watched. To Ashley's point, as these powerful weapons do their damage very, very quickly before people have time to intervene often. I think the fundamental issue here, the answer here, is not to figure out more ways to increase the punishment state and the surveillance state and the police state, but instead to get at the fundamental issues here. How do we get guns out of society? How do we stop access? How do we create the kind of mental health resources so that young people in particular don't feel compelled to go and shoot up supermarkets and schools and all this other stuff? How do we meet people's needs? It seems to me that we're still committed to figuring out how to respond to craziness and crisis rather than figuring out how to truly prevent it from happening in the first place.
I mean, it seems like I actually feel really heartened by the discussion that we're having here, because it does seem very solutions-oriented and not highly partisan-oriented. And I think that's part of what these debates devolve into immediately after a shooting. And is this the best way, what they're doing in Miami-Dade? I'm not sure, but I think it's one of the possible, arrows in that we can work with here. Let's look at that. Let's look at surveillance. Let's look at having armed officers. Let's look at maybe why some red flag laws seem to have failed here. Certainly, we knew going in that this young man was deeply troubled. We have heard stories about him threatening to rape and kill girls in his classroom. We have heard stories of him torturing and killing animals and posting pictures of himself with dead animals. So there were a lot of warning signs here, and I think we can look at that all up and down the chain and go, why do these warning signs continually fall through the cracks? And I think that's a really good question. As to the question of, well, it's sad that we need to have these conversations. It is sad, and given that we all kind of disagree on potentially what may be causing it. Is it fatherlessness? Is it breakdown in community connection, community involvement? Is it lack of faith, of church in communities? We have to have those conversations. And this conversation that we're having now is really good.
Right. I mean, and that's the thing. I mean, I think it's hard to necessarily or to try to draw through lines there, because I mean, there are plenty of children whose fathers are not involved in their lives, who are not going and shooting up schools, or who come from single parent families, or who maybe don't go to church every week.
How are you going to get those signs? Right? That cat business was deep into the ugly web, and so was his rape threats. That's not something that's going to show up at a store, even if we pass these red flag laws, right? That kid wouldn't have shown up in any documentation necessarily anywhere. We would have had to have report society, right? That we would have had to now establish, now you have to report every single person for all the weird stuff they do as teenagers, so that we have documentation of it, so that the red flag law, kicks into effect before the AR-15 comes off the wall and into his hands. And I don't think that's a solution either.
Threatening to rape and kill, it goes a little beyond weird stuff we do as teenagers. I mean, look, we have research that shows if you torture and kill animals, that's something more than,
I'm with you.
That is way beyond that.
Megan, I'm with you 100%. The only problem is that he's saying that to other kids, and he's saying that to other people who are young. He wasn't saying that in an open schoolroom where a teacher who's a member of, of the public good could report him. So it's almost as though, unless, lucky us, we have another teenager who decides to tell on him, we're not going to have documentation for that 18-year-old boy. And so he would be able to go and buy that gun, even though he's done really creepy stuff online to his friends.
And Mark, in so many of these cases, we did have documentation. In Buffalo, we had documentation. In the Parkland case, we had documentation. When they start going in, you find out that there are records and nothing happened.
That's true. And Mark, I know you had wanted to say something.
I think all these things are most of these things are true. I think that, yeah, if we have red flags and smoking guns, we should use them as evidence to not give people weapons and to not allow people to have access to weapons. I think we all agree to that. No one is saying if a kid is torturing a cat that we should give him an AR-15. I think the question is, how easy is it to know that, and should that become the thing that we use as the linchpin to decide whether it's going to happen?
Right.
But I think lastly, while we're throwing things out here, I don't want us to say, well, you know, there's lots of things and we should just weigh everything, because when we start weighing everything and saying, well, let's measure their faith and let's measure their fatherlessness and let's measure, when we start throwing all those things out, it makes it seem as if those things are as predictive as things that are far more important. And that's the only thing I will be concerned about.
Absolutely. All right, panel, we do have to move on. We're going to bring everyone back, though, in just a few minutes. We're going to discuss another topic. I appreciate everybody weighing in on this one. Obviously, no easy answers here, as we see time and time again. All right, next. What went wrong during the manhunt for a convicted killer? He not only had the chance to kill again, he apparently did, allegedly murdering an innocent family of 5, including 4 children. We'll talk about why he wasn't stopped before it happened. And later, Harry and Meghan made their first appearance at a public event in Britain since stepping down from their royal duties. Their own family didn't engage with them. Some even booed them. We'll discuss if the royal family bond is truly broken. A 3-week manhunt for an escaped inmate is over after police shoot and kill convicted killer Gonzalo Lopez. We now know Lopez is suspected of killing a grandfather and 4 of his grandchildren just a mile from where Lopez escaped. NewsNation's senior national correspondent Brian Enton is live for us tonight in Texas. And Brian, finally an end to this 3-week manhunt, but so much tragedy along the way.
Yeah, talking to people who live in this community, there's obviously relief that it is finally over, but they are also just so heartbroken by the way all of this ended. 5 people in one family, all murdered by this escapee, Gonzalo Lopez. We've learned that it was a 66-year-old grandfather and then 4 grandchildren. One was 18 years old and the other 3 were just children. This all started 3 weeks ago. You remember Gonzalo Lopez, a Mexican mafia member, a convicted killer, managed to escape from an inmate transport bus. He took off in this area, Centerville, Texas, where we are, about halfway between Houston and Dallas, and he's been on the run for 3 weeks. No one really knew, but he was still in this area hiding out. Yesterday, that family from Houston came to their weekend home here. They arrived in the morning. Authorities say they were spotted alive in the morning, and they believe that Lopez murdered the family in the afternoon and then took off with their weapons and their truck, went on the run. He was eventually tracked down outside San Antonio, Texas. Investigators telling me they believe that he was trying to flee to Mexico. They got into a chase with him. There was a gunfight. And they ended up shooting and killing that inmate, and that is how all of this ended. But I will tell you, Nicole, people here are frustrated. They are angry. They want to know how he was able to escape in the first place. We are told that there is an ongoing internal affairs investigation.
Absolutely. All right. Brian Enton live with that update. Thank you. Well, joining us again is our round table panel. We're going to talk about this topic. So, Ashley, on your show Banfield last night, you spoke to someone who lives in that area where Lopez was last seen, and what she said gave you chills. Let's listen.
I would say, even including myself, began to believe that this man had left Leon County and that he was somewhere else in Texas, if not Mexico, by now. And they were not letting, there were no more briefings, not only for y'all, but no one, no law enforcement were really giving us any details as to any updates regarding the search whatsoever. We all began to let our guard down, all of us.
All right, so I know Capri has a really unique take on this one, too. But, Ashley, that was on your show last night. We heard from that resident there. Did law enforcement adequately update the community about Lopez's possible location?
I'm going to read you a text from one of those people in law enforcement that I had begged for 2 days straight to come on my show to talk about the danger in that community, to put the picture up to show that community what you should look for if you see him and report him, and to bar your doors, because this is a very unsafe place to be if that guy is anywhere nearby. He needs food, supplies, guns, and probably a vehicle. And if you're in his way, you mean nothing. He killed someone with a pickaxe. Here's the response I got on May 19th, on a Thursday night. We continue to look for him. We have nothing new to release at this time. When we do, we'll contact the network. That was the answer I got repeatedly, asking those officers to come on the show, update, warn the community. And so you just heard that woman, Melanie, how angry she was that they didn't tell her that there was a danger, that they didn't even knock on her door if they weren't at least going to go to broadcasters and spread the word that this man is lethal. She was so mad, and she was also heartbroken. I don't know if you heard later, but she broke down into tears because she has a connection to that family. So I'm sorry. I've done enough manhunts in my day. That is absolutely inexcusable. That's a PIO telling me nothing to see here. I'm too tired, too busy, can't be on.
And Capri, again, you have a unique perspective here. Again, state senator in a district where there was an area where there was a school shooting, and that shooter apparently also escaped and was on the run for a few days.
Yep. Yeah, so, all this, thinking about back to the last block, that same incident where that shooter killed 4 people, a few years later, after he was in prison, for a few years, he and a handful of other inmates escaped from prison. They were on the lam for a few days. They ultimately tried to, they did capture them. There were not any casualties, but there was a lot of panic in a number of communities across the state of Ohio, wondering where this guy was, knowing he was dangerous. And to Ashley's point, you don't want to be where these people are because they need what you have. They're looking for a vehicle to get away. They're looking for a change of clothes or to disguise themselves, whatever it may be. Ultimately, that shooter from Chardon got transferred into a supermax prison, which actually is not very far from where I am, where my district was. And so that made us very nervous because we thought to ourselves, okay, it's called supermax prison, but how easy, he got out before, there was no guarantee that he could get out again. And in the case that we're talking about today in Texas, from some of the reporting that I saw, this guy who ultimately perished at the hands of law enforcement apparently has done this before. And somebody said, oh, he's like a Houdini or something of that nature. My God, I mean, the level of breakdown in this whole process from whoever in corrections that transported him all the way to the public information officers that were not sharing information, there's a lot of blame to go around, and a tragedy.
Yeah, a family left grieving. Yeah, Mark, what are your thoughts?
This is one of those situations where, first of all, I would imagine everybody on this panel, quite rarely maybe, will all agree, right? This was a breakdown. This was bad. People should have been alerted. I don't think there's anyone who would disagree with that. I think the question that we have to think about, though, is what does this say about the bigger question of police in society, of prison in society? You know, a lot of times people don't understand why communities lack trust in law enforcement, why they lack trust in community-based policing models. The problem is that often law enforcement is closing ranks around itself. And I'm not saying that the police officers in this case had a bad intention, or that they were intending to put people at harm's way, or that they were indifferent to people suffering, but they certainly didn't consider it, and they certainly didn't prioritize it in their decision-making processes. This is why communities need to be involved in these processes. This is why people ask for community-based oversight of police. This is why people ask for civilian and citizen review boards. It's not just because people don't trust police to not investigate themselves, although that's true. It's also because without community involved in the taking care and the protection of their own neighborhoods, you end up with situations like this where we're trusting law enforcement, and then we find out there's somebody who's a crazy killer running through the world and not telling us anything.
Yeah, and Megan, obviously hindsight is always 20/20, but in this instance, it's deadly hindsight here. We're looking back at what should have been done differently.
Right, and I think this is something that we can all agree on, that there definitely seems to be a breakdown, and this closing ranks is problematic. It was problematic in Uvalde, but to speak to that larger issue that Mark Lamont brought up, I have to wonder, do we need to start having a discussion about capital punishment in a situation like this? This man was known to have a willful, gross disregard of life. It was very well known that if he could get access to the public again, that people's lives would be in danger. Not just in danger, but very likely that people would die, that people would be killed. And when you have shown that you have no regard for the lives of others, I can't help but think that we would have avoided this situation if he had been subject to the highest penalty under the law.
And Ashley, oh, go ahead, Mark.
A few things I would strongly disagree with that. One, I'm not sure that would have prevented this. When people break out of prison, I mean, most people who are on death row end up on death row for many years. They often don't end up executed. Yeah. They often end up filing appeal after appeal after appeal. And guess what? You can break out of prison.
He couldn't have done this if he had not been still on this earth. He could not possibly have escaped and done what he did.
No, but you're
Can I just throw in the stats there? It takes
Yeah.
more than 20 years usually to kill somebody,
exactly.
and I just went over his record, and he started his criminal odyssey in life at age 20. We wouldn't even be at the point where he had committed the kind of felony. Yeah, I mean, Mark Lamont Hill's right. It takes a long time, and by the way,
though.
but it's a good thing it takes a long time. Let me just say this, because this is one of the things that I have been so passionate about in my entire legal life, and that is that we screw up. And you don't get a mulligan with the death penalty. I could pull the lever myself if someone killed my family member without question. It's not a morality issue. It's a, oh my God, we are bad at this. We are really bad at justice. We mess up all the time, and you cannot mess up.
But when we have
all right, panel. So we've now
man's
moved to the
case
death
where there was
penalty
no
discussion.
question.
We'll never. Let's move on from this because obviously I know this is a topic that we could continue on, and maybe at some point we will talk about that because that's now I think moved over to the death penalty discussion. But for now, we will be coming back, and we are going to talk about the royals, Meghan and Harry. Seen together, finally, their first appearance since they left the royal family, gave up those duties. Is the family bond forever broken? We'll discuss.